This story, although it started at sea, ended here in these woods on these hills in Surrey. It's a story of piracy, it's a story of smuggling, and it's the story of betrayal, murder, and then, depending on how you want to think of it, possibly a revenge of a pirate. John Trenchman grew up in London's 17th century Dockland among the sailing ships and sailors from 100 foreign lands. Inspired by tales of adventure and the gold of the Spanish Main, aged 12 he ran away to sea, joining the crew of Henry Morgan, the notorious Caribbean pirate. So, after joining Henry Morgan and plundering the Caribbean, to avoid the threat from Spain of war, the British King ordered that all pirates be captured and tried and hung. Fearing this, Trenchman decided to retire at the age in his 50s, and he left the life at sea to take up profitable life on land, smuggling. It was then, on one day, travelling back up from receiving a load of contraband from the south coast, heading to be delivered to Croydon, he was betrayed by one of his own crew. In 1687, a fellow crew member of John's who joined him in smuggling was in a pub one evening and he got involved in a brawl. His Majesty's men entered the pub to break up the brawl and arrest those offenders. Spotting that Trenchman's man was a pirate, or once a pirate, they went and arrested him immediately. Now, fearing the gallows, this man turned King's evidence against John, and he did a deal with the British government to tell them everything he knew about the whereabouts and the smuggling operations of John Trenchman and his other men. So in 1687, with the news that John Trenchman was smuggling contraband from the south coast to the town of Croydon, the King's men and the custom officials set out to ambush him. It was here at Tilburstow Hill, in a low-lying patch of woodland, that John, on his way through on the old road heading to Croydon town, was ambushed by the King's men. A bloody battle took place between them, and all of the men died except for John, who later escaped and headed off to make his retreat back down the hill towards the Fox and Hounds pub. Now, Tilburstow Hill is a patch of woodland that's marked on the map. We're in South Godstone, between Bletchley and Nutley, and East Grindid further to the south. But this area at Tilburstow Hill is a low-lying patch with an open field next to it, heading south. So it's likely that John, with his men, would have been coming up here, and somewhere in this woodland below me, because it's a steep drop down there, would have been waiting for him, and the ambush most likely took place here. So I can imagine the panic John would have had trying to get away, being mortally wounded and losing a lot of blood. But he had to make it to safety, because although he was surely possibly going to die, it was far better than what lay in store for him had the King's men got them. Because back in them times, piracy, because of that threat of war, and we'd just had a few wars, and it was costing a lot of money to the government and the King. So every attempt was made to avoid this. And pirates were made an example for, with their heads cut off, stuffed on London Bridge on poles to make an example. It was a gruesome time in history. But then one could argue, were pirates the way we make them out to be from the films, like Pirates of the Caribbean with the lovable Jack Sparrow? No, it wasn't. They were horrific, and believe it or not, it's not how the films show you. It was probably more horrifically gruesome. And Captain Morgan was a renowned pirateer. Now, John would have learnt everything he knew from him. So when this time came to get out of there and get out of the trade, literally, of piracy, John took it, and I say, ended up in this place. So, laying in wait, the King's men and the customs officials waited for John and his men. Now, it's more likely or not that they waited here in this low area of Tilburstow Hill, because it does say in the history books that John was making his way up from the south coast with his men heading to Croydon, and he was attacked in South Godstone, Tilburstow Hill, in a small patch of low-lying woodland. So the road is directly in front of us, and I imagined the King's men would have hidden around this hill, peeping over it, watching John coming. It is quite harrowing to be here because of knowing, as you see a lorry, that's where the road is, but we're right by the ambush site. Now, John would have been coming up there, ambushed by the King's men, and a bloody scurry of an ambush happened, and all of the men died. John was mortally wounded, but he made his escape, and he headed back south down towards the Fox and Hounds pub. Now this area is possibly the site. There are many around here, but it fits all the descriptions of what's written about this pirate and the ambush. The hills behind me rise up, and this is the lowest part to the road. The other side goes into a lower field, so the fact that it's woodland, low line next to the road, it fits the bill. So, but it is eerie, thinking of all that bloodshed here. It gets even more eerie when you stumble across randomly in the woods dug out hollows like this, almost in the shape of a coffin or a body. But I'd say that was done a lot later than the 17th century. So we're going to head on to the next point of this story. So it's down this hill from Tilburstow Hill at the top there that John made it somehow miraculously to this pub, the Fox and Hounds. So after making it here with those terrible, horrific wounds that he must have suffered from the skirmish, John entered the pub and he later died here. Now, after that, this is where the story takes a little bit of a turn. Now, you can hear the cars and the traffic passing. It's because we're on it's a main road there. Now, back in John's day, it would have just been a simple track coming up from Eastbourne, going to Croydon, and he probably had no expectation what was laying ahead of him. And as he laid here dying, I wonder if he felt anger and betrayal that just festered in him in his last moments towards his friend, his pal, crewmate, for turning him in against the King's men to save his own neck. But as I said earlier, this would have been a far more kinder way for John to die here in this pub than at the gallows or the torture from the King's men. I mean, this pub has been a pub since the 1600s, and the building goes back as far as the 1300s. So even this pub itself has got quite a bit of history. But the story does take that turn, and it becomes more mysterious and darker, and this is where the revenge kicks in. So after John's death, the local villagers in the little village of Godstone took pity on John and they took his body up here to St Nicholas Church, where they buried him in an unmarked grave because pirates were not given a proper Christian burial. Now this is where perhaps the revenge comes in. Two grave diggers were in the churchyard one evening digging a grave, and as they walked through the churchyard, a figure sprung up from behind one of the headstones. Now the figure was dressed in seamen's sailors' outfits, in dark cloak, and the men ran as the figure chased after them. Other such things have been pools of blood forming at the altar within the church itself. Now, in my last video I said I love ghost stories, but you know, I have always find a practical thing, you know, but I love the myth, I love the legend. Now, was this John's revenge? Was he stalking the people because they gave him an unmarked grave, a burial, not a non-Christian burial? And this, along with the betrayal from his own men, must have enraged his spirit. So he took to haunting the graveyard and anyone who came in it. So we're in the south part of the cemetery itself, of the graveyard, and it would have been somewhere down through here at the back, possibly at the bottom there, way out of the way of anyone to be seen, that they buried John's body. And it is said that he rose up and walked and haunted the surrounding village in the anger of the betrayal, and his revenge was to haunt. Now, as this went on, the church wardens had had enough. There was too many people saying they'd seen the ghost of John Trenchman, or shadowy figures, pools of blood in the church itself by the altar. So they decided to exhume his body and give him a proper Christian burial. So I'm actually heading down to the south side at the back of the cemetery of the graveyard to see for myself where someone like John Edward Trenchman would have been buried, because he was a criminal to the crown and didn't deserve a Christian burial. Now we're heading to the very lower corner of the boundary, and I can only assume that the wooden fence is on the existing lines of the original church as it would have been back then. But it's actually a lovely peaceful place down here. But if that's true with regards to relation to where the church is up there and where they would have put him, I would have imagined poor John was just buried somewhere here. So as I mentioned, the church wardens patrolling, the incident with the grave diggers and the sailor, well, the seaman, that tall man in a dark cloak figure chasing them through the graveyard, plus accounts from the locals. After they exhumed his body and gave him a Christian burial, it was felt that they needed to keep him close so they could keep an eye on him, because pirate graves were prone to be vandalised through the hatred that people had towards them. But as I say, in this village they took pity on John because of the way he was attacked, and they buried him right outside here. So this is John's last resting place, and after he was buried here, given a full Christian burial, all the sightings, all the disturbances ceased. So finally, I guess John was at peace. So there's many stories to be said about the Godstone Pirate, but I've not seen any that's actually gone to Tilburstow Hill, where the horror of the ambush happened, where this man's life was effectively taken. But he lays here now peacefully, not a burial at sea, but a peaceful one outside the church, where no doubt when the congregation are sitting in there, the choir, he lays at rest with the sounds of the church and the churchyard. Well, John's isn't the only pirate's gravestone that's in this churchyard. There's another one that you can come and find. It's right on the entrance on the path leading up to the front of the church itself. It's hard to make out the inscription as it's so weather worn, or even a date, but you could clearly on this one too see the skull and crossbone, a true marker of a pirate. Well, I hope you enjoyed that one, because it's a credible story. It's been told so many times, but it's always nice to just bring it back, refresh it, because it's an incredible story of piracy, smuggling, betrayal and murder. You know, and it all from the far Caribbean and the skirmishes out there, the battles, the swashbuckling, the pillaging, you know, it all ends here at Godstone Church, St Nicholas.